like to give the floor to Professor Goran Bandov. This is the co-chair of the Human Rights and Global Migration Working Group. He will introduce the Global Young Academy and its role in promoting discussion and reflection on global affairs. So please, Professor Bandov, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So Mr. Alia Abdahadi told me actually I have only half hour, so I will use only, no joke, of course. He said me actually only 2 minutes, and I will try to put everything in 1 minute. So, my dear friends, I'm very happy to greet you all in the name of the Global Young Academy and the Global Migration and Human Rights Working Group. As you already know, Global Young Academy is the voice of and for young scientists over the world. My strongest Global Young Academy strongly support international, interdisciplinary, and intergenerational cooperation and dialogue. And when we are talking about dialogue, dialogue is always needed, but especially in difficult times. As you already know, we are living in very rough, difficult, and dangerous times. I will want for all of us to live in boring times. But the Middle East has never been a boring region. Life in this region is always full of excitement. New geopolitical games, a lot of rearrangement on the global scene, pandemic COVID-19. Middle East region was and is one of the most sensitive world regions. So the Global Young Academy and Global Migration and Human Rights GIA Working Group has organized this webinar to bring these experts to discuss what is the future of United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine in the Agency for Palestine Refugees in Near East after the US President Donald Trump. I look forward to your short presentation and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bandov. I just realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Nuria Masdeo. I am working currently in Palestine, and I am head of mission and country representative of a French NGO working on the field. Again, I would like to thank you for joining us in this webinar. So the topic is UNRWA After Trump, the way forward. And I think it's a very interesting topic because actually the Trump administration, with the decision of cutting aid to the UNRWA, reversed the policy of support that every US president since the creation of UNRWA 70 years ago had as part of America's support for stability in the Middle East. And it affected not only the basic needs of more than 5 million refugees that are in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Jordan, and in Syria, but also a lot of projects on cooperation and development in the region. So to deal with this topic, we have three outstanding speakers this evening. I would like to introduce all of them. First, Dr. Sami Miyari is member of the Global Young Academy and researcher on the field of labor economics and the economic causes and consequences of conflict. Also, I would like to introduce Dr. Daniela Huber, head of the Mediterranean and Middle East program at the Istituto d'Affari Internazionali in Rome. And Dr. Ibrahim Frihat, which we are still missing, but will join us in the next minutes. He is Associate Professor in International Conflict Resolution at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. So I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Sami Miyari. Please feel free.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Hello, Dr. Ibrahim Frihat. I just had introduced you, so very happy to have you here.
I'm so sorry. I thought we still have 1 hour, so I just got confused with the timing.
No problem.
Apologies. Sorry.
So again, Dr. Miyari, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thank you very much for this conference. During my speech, I will try to give more details about the work of UNRWA in Palestine and also in Lebanon and Syria, and to try to explain to you why it's danger and risk to this seas of financial aid to the UNRWA, especially in Gaza Strip, and what kind of risk we will have. If I will have enough time, I will talk also about the alternatives that the Palestinians should work on it in order to relieve this kind of danger for the Palestinian. UNRWA become the largest agency of the United Nations, and providing education, healthcare, social services, and other type of health and relief efforts to over than 5 million Palestinian refugees residing in Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. For example, in 2017, UNRWA budget amounted roughly about $1 billion. The organization funded by the contribution, of which only 4% or 5% received from the UN, and the other 96% made by different voluntary contributor, the most important of which are the United States and European government. In 2018, the US have the first cut their contribution, but about 1/3. And in August of the same year, they ceased the financial support of UNRWA. The loss of UNRWA's largest donor threatened to undermine the activities of the organization. The cut in funding increased the risk of partial or full shutdown, potentially creating a humanitarian crisis. I will try to review the services provided by the organization, discuss their importance and the consequences of the UNRWA shutdown. And if I will have time again, I will talk and give more detail about the alternative policies. The organization operating in 700 schools, for example, in the field of education, the UNRWA operating 700 schools, which over 500,000 students, as well as 8 vocational and technical training centers. And also, they operating 2 educational sciences faculties. Despite all the financial constraint, and also most UNRWA students are underprivileged. For example, learning outcome of students enrolled in to UNRWA schools in Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, outperformed students enrolled in local public school in international assessments such as TIMSS and PISA. In the 1960s, UNRWA schools were among the first in the Middle East to achieve gender equality, which has been maintained ever since. In the field of health, UNRWA provided various health services to the Palestinian refugees, including preventive and curative primary care, aid in accessing secondary and tertiary healthcare services. In 2017, about 8 million patient visits were taken in 143 primary healthcare facilities. These services are especially critical in Gaza Strip, where access to medicine and health services is very limited. UNRWA's relief and social services program also provided a social safety net to the most poor group of refugees who live in absolute poverty, where out of the 5 million refugees, roughly 1 million live in absolute poverty. In 2013, about 300,000 refugees were provided with the basic food and modest cash assistance as part of the UNRWA program. Another central social service provided by UNRWA is community centers in cooperation with community-based organizations. Often, there are the only community structure available for refugees. They amount to 33 community rehabilitation centers, 33 community development centers, 43 community managed fund schemes, and 48 women's program centers. In the field of microfinance, other than the service that I talked about, UNRWA supports human and business development among refugees by granting loans to household and small business owners. Microfinance program have been successfully practiced in Gaza Strip since 1991, and in the West Bank since 1996, and in Syria and Jordan since 2003. 500,000 loans have been given since the program's inception, and the cumulative value of loans awarded to the almost $500 billion. About 38 of the loans were given to women, and about 33 were given to youth between the ages 18 and 30. In the field of infrastructure, as we know, 58 recognized camps located in Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. These camps were originally built for temporary use. However, with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remaining unresolved, camps have become overcrowded to life-threatening level. To address this issue, UNRWA has launched the Infrastructure and Camp Improvement Program. Since its inception in 2007, this program has allowed to the improvement of life conditions in the camps and the building of new school, shelters, and health centers. In Gaza Strip, infrastructure renewal has become reconstruction with UNRWA activities critical in rebuilding houses and infrastructure destroyed during the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, especially after 2009. These sort of development have also helped creating employment opportunities to the Palestinians, especially for refugees. In 2017, 3,000 jobs were created thanks to the intervention made by the UNRWA, and 2,000 of them in Gaza Strip. The importance of the UNRWA we can see in many fields. For many families, UNRWA is the only organization to provide the most basic services required for even the most basic sort of help. For many children, UNRWA schools are the only place that provides some refuge from the harsh reality of life and the chance for social mobility and human capital development. For many working age people, UNRWA is the best option for employment opportunities, either creating by the UNRWA program intervention and microloan, or directly as UNRWA's area staff numbers, about 30,000. Noria, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and mostly comprised for local refugees. In the short term, after the Trump's plan to seize the financial aid, there are two important impacts for the Palestinian refugees. One, in the short term, I think all people receiving aid or services from UNRWA will stop receiving it. And that includes, among others, the half a million students in UNRWA school losing access to education, over 30,000 local employees becoming unemployed, and over 200 clients of the UNRWA program returning to absolute poverty, and hundreds of thousands of patients losing access to medical services. While in stable and developing region of the world, most of the refugees would find alternative means of support. I mean, the refugees in Syria, Lebanon, maybe Lebanon, no, but Egypt and other countries. To many of these refugees, especially in Gaza, they have no other option or alternatives. So we can imagine what kind of rest. In the long run, this will not only lead to increasing level of extreme poverty and bad nutrition in all of the mentioned regions, but also increase the level of political tension and violence. We will probably experience larger numbers of Palestinians joining insurgent groups, sorry for if I'm saying insurgent groups, committing local crimes, and larger waves of refugees attempting to cross border, like what we witnessed in Sudan and Eritrea, such as, for example, Turkey and the other European Union countries. This possibility should stimulate the past and present donor of the UNRWA, as well as other stakeholders, to rethink current policies and decisions and change them as to better reflect the current challenges and dangers. There are many research, and I'm always trying to look at the impact of the economic condition in Palestine, in Gaza and in West Bank, and the economic condition, the impact of economic condition on the involvement of Palestinians in violence. And there are many evidence on the bad economic condition will stimulate many refugees and many young refugees to be more involved in local crime and also in the external violence. What I mean external violence with the the tension between Israelis and Palestinians. So this is the time to rethink about how we can relieve this kind of seizing the aid and the financial aid for refugees, and trying to find also other alternatives for Palestinian refugees. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miyari, for your clear exposition. So I would like to give the floor now to Dr. Daniela Huber.
Thank you so much. And this was a very good presentation. Thank you, Sami. I'm turning now to the international community, because this is what I do my research on. So I will first zoom a little bit on the international community and then go to the European Union and its role. The Palestine refugees are, of course, the only refugees who do not fall under the UNHCR and instead have their own agency with UNRWA. And I would like to first briefly disentangle this story a bit, because it is often turned against UNRWA without any historical understanding of how UNRWA actually came into being at the level of the international community. Now, to go a bit in chronological order, a few months after Resolution 181, the partition plan, and the massive violence that followed it, UN mediator on Palestine, Fort Bernadotte, drafted Resolution 194 regarding the Palestine refugees that lost their homes in 1948. He handed in the draft resolution on 16 September 48, and he was murdered the day right after. So the assassination was directly linked to this draft also. The resolution affirms the right of return and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return. 194 also set up the UN Conciliations Commission, which however failed to bring about repatriation or compensation of the Palestine refugees. And so because of this failure of the international community to bring about a resolution. And this is the reason this failure lasts until today. This is why UNRWA was founded in December 1949 as a humanitarian agency. So still today, UNRWA mirrors the international community's failure and obligation to provide a just and durable solution for the Palestine refugees. Now, it should also be mentioned here that Israel's admission to the United Nations in May 1949 was actually not unconditional. Its first bid for admission was indeed rejected. So its admission in 1949 was bound to the full acceptance of the UN resolutions, including 181 and 194. However, neither the US nor the EU or its member states or the Soviet Union, then Russia, who had dominated the UN at the time, have ever held Israel accountable for its rejection of repatriation in the past 73 years. Now, the UNHCR was then formed 1 year later, mainly for the European refugees which have been displaced by World War II. The reasons for not merging UNRWA into UNHCR are rooted in the full recognition of the heavy price paid by Palestinians for the decision taken by the international community in the late 1940s. But it should nonetheless be pointed out here that the refugee rights and who constitutes a refugee are the same for UNRWA and UNHCR. Also the Refugee Convention, which sets the scope for UNHCR, states that refugees should be able to choose whether they wish to return. This is an individual right of each refugee. And the Refugee Convention also defines that refugee rights are passed on to other generations. And also the UNHCR is actually obliged to promote and facilitate durable solutions, so that is repatriation, integration, and resettlement. Indeed, the main practice of UNHCR is repatriation. For example, in the first half of last year, 2020, some 100,000 refugees returned to their countries of origin, while 17,000 were resettled. Now, what is different between UNHCR and UNRWA is that UNRWA actually has a much more limited protection functions, since the finding of a durable solution was mandated to the Conciliations Commission. So instead, UNRWA's mandate mainly covers humanitarian aid and assistance, which Sami has very well summarized. So this protection gap of UNRWA has actually become very evident again with the war in Syria and the secondary enforced displacement of Palestinian refugees from Syria. Now, against this background a little bit, so where did this US onslaught, or let's say the Trump assault on UNRWA come from? So I think, obviously, this was not the only international agency which Trump has moved against. But I think there are also two particular reasons to this. One is that, as I said before, the presence of UNRWA is a standing reminder that the international community has failed to assert the Palestinian right to return. So UNRWA embodies this right, and the US, also other US institutions such as Congress, for example, tried to undermine that before. Now, however, what happened now with Biden is that he has actually reassumed aid to UNRWA, even though not at the pre-Trump levels. And secondly, I think UNRWA over time has also played a role in keeping alive the subjectivity of Palestinians as a people. So to make my point a bit better here, so that this is not understood in the wrong way. So what I mean here is that since 1948, 67, and I would also include 2009 with the blockade of Gaza, the Palestinian people have gradually always been fragmented into the Palestine refugees, Palestinians living in Israel, those under Israeli occupation, including also those under blockade. And each of these units is kind of ruled under different legal regimes, which of course fragments the Palestinian community, not only territorially, but also in terms of very different experiences and subjectivities. Now, when it comes to UNRWA, then originally it was founded to merge the refugees into the places they fled to, initially through the Works program, and until today, of course, also in all the various activities, but also in the schools, as they need to adopt the respective national curriculum, and the donors of UNRWA actually have a large say on the school books. And this issue is continuously coming up again and again. But what is important, I think, is that teaching is a social practice, and so UNRWA teachers do play an important role. And furthermore, UNRWA also has, I think, an important function in terms of preserving Palestinian memory with its archive on the refugee records. So I think the onslaught on UNRWA by the Trump administration came not only to remove this issue from the international agenda, but also to undermine Palestinian peoplehood in a way. Now, how does the European Union sit in this whole story? The EU, of course, technically supports UNRWA, and it has also substituted quite a bit for the loss of US funding, Germany in particular. This can be read, I think, in various ways. I think this also came in light of the war in Syria and the Palestinian refugees in Syria, which are in a particularly precarious situation, similar, of course, also to the Palestinian refugees in Gaza, where lately, I think also the coronavirus crisis is picking up. So I think this increase of EU funding really can be read also from this humanitarian perspective. Now, if we look at it more from a political perspective, so the EU technically supports the Palestinian refugees through UNRWA, but when it comes to the right of return, let's say the EU has become more absorbed into the US framework of the Middle East peace process, which has built on the idea that the right of return is something which is subject to negotiation, even though this is, of course, under international law an individual right, actually. And well, if we look a little bit to the future, I mean, I'm certain that the European Union will continue its funding to UNRWA. When it comes more to the political side of this larger issue, I think the European Union, or let's say that the new Biden administration doesn't look very likely to me to take up again any kind of role in reviving the peace process or anything. And what is interesting here is, however, that the European Union tries anyways to stick very much to this idea. And I think that this will be increasingly difficult for the European Union to uphold, not only in light of what is happening in Europe itself in terms of various new social movements, but also really in light of the absence of any kind of peace process. The Palestine question is inevitably turning back to rights. So issues such as the right of self-determination, right of return, civil and political rights, equal rights, citizenship rights, etc. And so I think, yes, as long as, of course, these issues are not solved, it is clear that the European funding to UNRWA will continue in that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoover. I would like now to give the floor to Dr. Ibrahim Fihad.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to be with you discussing this really important subject, especially with the recent developments that we're seeing happening on the UNRWA situation. And since Sami covered more on the work of UNRWA and Daniela on the European, so I'll focus on the American dimension, and also especially that the topic of this discussion is about the UNRWA after the Trump administration. And in order to understand the future or the way forward, as per this, the title of this topic, and understanding the US role here, because I believe the US role is a key factor that will determine the future, the future of UNRWA, at least on the short run, and the way that is going to affect it. Let me just take a historical overview in bullet points very quickly on how the US position evolved, or in fact was downgraded on the position of the refugees and the UNRWA, starting with 1948, that when Harry Truman actually pressured Ben-Gurion to allow for 200,000 refugees, Palestinian refugees, to go back to their homes, but Ben-Gurion refused that. In 1949, the US voted for Security Council Resolution 302 to establish the UNRWA. So we were still seeing an advanced, a progressive position on the US side. But we started to see the first changes during the 70s and 80s, where the US narrative, official narrative, moved from applying the Security Council resolutions 194 and all other Security Council resolutions, to more of finding a just solution. So that was a major move on that level. But then in 2000, the US position moved from finding a just solution to the Clinton parameters, right, which was more about the Clinton parameters on the Palestinian refugees of settlement in the host countries and resettlement in other countries. So downgrading more and more over time. And then during George Bush W time, with the US moved also from a just solution or from the Clinton parameters to finding a new language that the US administration started to use, which is finding a realistic and agreed upon solution. And here we got into a wholly new change, a whole new level about what is really the definition of a realistic and agreed upon. For the first time, the US administration introducing this agreed upon condition to solve the refugees or the right of return. But even further than that, in 2008 with Barack Obama and what he tried to find a solution, Barack Obama in 2008 spoke openly that no return of refugees to Israel, the way he put it. So again, even that got downgraded from George W. Bush position. And until then, you know, we have the Donald Trump position that became the most aggressive compared to US history position, official position on the Palestinian refugees, where he stopped the financial aid to UNRWA entirely, downgraded from $369 million to zero. And the most dangerous, this is not always the most dangerous actually, of what Donald Trump introduced during his time about the issue of the Palestinian refugees in UNRWA, is that he tried to delegitimize the cause of the refugees by the way that he wanted to do that. Nikki Haley, his ambassador to the UN, that they tried to come up with a new definition of the Palestinian refugees, of limiting this to about 40 to 50,000 refugees, downgraded, and then from 5 million Palestinian refugees today to limiting it to 40,000 and redefining the whole thing. So this is how the US moved our proposition, and this gives us an indicator on where the US is moving next, because over this historical development and the way the US downgraded its position on this was not just a single event or a single position that was taken, but it was more of a pattern of declining and declining and declining the rights of the refugees and the just cause of the Palestinian refugees. So moving forward after Trump, and again back to the title of this discussion, there are a few things that we have to keep in mind. The very first thing that I would like to highlight is that what Trump did will not be totally reversible. So that pre-Donald Trump position. So let's keep that in mind as one major thing. Because again, as we've seen of this historical pattern, it's going down and down. And we can see this in two areas. One is that Biden is reversing decisions that Trump took in almost every area in the world, except on the Palestinian refugees. He's giving many incentives to Iran for nuclear negotiations. He's returning to the Paris protocol, environment protocol, the relationship with the EU, almost everything. But we have not seen serious reversal of the positions or the policies that Trump took during his time with regards to the Palestinian refugees or the Palestinian cause in general. The very first thing that we've seen partial reversal over here is on the UNRWA of restoring or resuming the American financial aid to the UNRWA with allocating about 150 million for UNRWA just 2 days ago. And again, that was from $369 million in 2018, for example. So it's less. Not only this, not only in terms of reduction of the financial aid to UNRWA, but also the terminology that has been used in terms of emergency assistance. So it's not the way it was used to be before on that level. Not only this, but the second thing we should expect in terms of how the US is going to deal with UNRWA also is making these aids conditional, meaning from what we gathered of statements from the US administrators on this issue, is that there has been a talk over expectations of the UNRWA to reform. And under reform, you can imagine, you can put all sorts of things, whether it's in terms of a destination or financial, but even more important, in terms of reform of the curriculum of the UNRWA schools in the different countries. So we're talking emergency, we're talking making this conditional, and that's again what I meant also by even Biden has taken small steps, but we should not expect that Biden will reverse in full what was happening. And still, in historical perspective, Biden is going to continue this pattern of declining and downgrading of the US position on the refugees and the UNRWA. This is important, especially related to the third point that I would like to make about the overall US strategy, not only about the UNRWA, but about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in general, not just about the UNRWA and the refugees. And here, the way I understand the Biden administration's position on this is that is not going to lead in terms of peace and conflict resolution of this conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but mainly the US strategy for the next 4 years is going more to focus about the way, again, the US officials have put it, in terms of preventing further decay of the two-state solutions. So it's not leading, but in terms of resisting unilateral policies and unilateral actions in order, the way it was termed, of preventing further decay and maintaining the status quo. So meaning, again, we're not seeing a position on that level of finding a solution, which this overall strategy will reflect itself on the issue of the refugees and UNRWA, because since, again, the macro strategy, the larger strategy of the US administration on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is more about preventing the further deterioration of the status quo, rather than leading and delivering or pressuring or encouraging even peaceful resolution or a resolution of this conflict. So this gives us, or tells me, that the US position is going to continue on the UNRWA on that level of trying to provide a relief and emergency assistance rather than delivering a solution. Because the other point that I would like to make here is that the solution, the only solution for the refugees and for the UNRWA is about a political solution and a dignified, that provides or delivers a dignified solution for the refugees and addresses the rights of the refugees, the right of return, and according to the UN Security Council resolution. So again, another point that I would like to make, which is in line of this connection with the overall conflict, because we should not see the refugees and the rights of the Palestinian refugees as, or UNRWA that's operating in vacuum, that it's not related to the overall conflict. And here I would like to emphasize is that it's not only about what the US administration will be doing in the next 4 years, but even more importantly, in my view, it's about what the Palestinians will be doing in the next 4 years on the Palestinian national project and the larger national Palestinian cause, which again will reflect itself on the rights of the refugees and the UNRWA. Meaning, if the Palestinians are able to put their house together and they're able to rise again and overcome the dark chapter of divisions and try to come up with a new national strategy, a new liberation strategy that justly address the Palestinian cause, and we are seeing more of a strong, unified Palestinian front and a vision, and the Palestinians are leading in terms of on the larger national cause. This will definitely reflect itself on the rights of the refugees and on the work of the UNRWA. Now, sadly speaking, I'm not seeing that, sadly again, that the Palestinians, given what we have or what we're seeing, especially on the latest elections and the way it's being run, I'm not seeing strong indicators that the Palestinians, unfortunately, will be doing this. So I think it's going to be more of similar to the past, which is, again, it will affect the rights of the refugees badly. So the other point that I would like to make is that which is again also related to the larger framework and the larger political environment, is related to what's happening in the region as a whole. And as you know, we have a troubled region, revolutions, Arab Spring, and also the failure of the Arab Spring in general in many countries, and the way it produced civil wars in different countries. We are seeing patterns of an increased illegal immigration in terms of leaving the Middle East and dying in the Mediterranean, trying to reach Europe and all of that. And here I would like to agree and highlight with Sami and highlight what he said about this connection about delivering a dignified, just solution, and the lack of which results in more joining, whether it's terrorist, radical groups, or illegal immigration, or all these type of things that we're seeing in the region. Because again, the refugees are part of this region and the UNRWA is part of this region and cannot be separated or totally separated from the region. The very last point that I would like to make, so I can hopefully end on a good point over here, is that there is a way, is that for at least the time being, to try to improve and do something about the lack of prospects for a solution, because I'm not seeing a political solution, unfortunately, whether it's from the Americans or from the Palestinian leadership. So for the time being, I think there is an opportunity to improve the conditions of the Palestinian refugees in where they are in the host countries. And this is not, I'm not talking about, and it's not in any way related to settlement of where they are and becoming citizens of Lebanon or Syria. No. It's about the discrimination and the unjust oppressive systems in a number of countries, namely in Lebanon, that discriminates openly against the Palestinian refugees, of preventing them of joining 71 or 72 types of jobs in Lebanon in order to survive and make a dignified living, right? This is not about, again, settlements or about citizenship of Lebanon or a political solution. It's about a dignified life, right? That should be, I think, the focus, or where things, where efforts should concentrating in the near future. And again, until there is a political solution where things can be addressed more on the root causes and the just solution of the refugees. And I think here related to this is that, which is, I'm very critical of this, which is the funding, the emergency funding that UNRWA and the Palestinian refugees are continue to live on, this emergency funding and the relief type of work, because I think it's about time to talk about sustainable solutions. I mean, this relief assistance that's depending on political positions of other countries, it's all subjected to exploitations, discriminations, like what we've seen during the Trump administration, is that we there is assistance, there is no assistance, and then you leave thousands of UNRWA teachers and students and all of that, you throw them in the seas. I think it's about time to think about sustainable solutions for the time being, for the short run, until there is a right and just solution. And there are ways that can this be explored. And again, a starting point could be in terms, could be seen in terms of providing or allowing refugees to have a dignified life of where they are in Syria, in Lebanon, and in other countries. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Freihat, for your very clear exposition. I think we can start with the discussion. I have one question for Dr. Miyari. He was explaining at the beginning about the different alternatives that can be developed in order to provide support to the refugees and not being so much depending on the funding. And this is exactly the point that I think also Dr. Freihat was doing in terms of sustainability, no? Because I think that one of the result, or one of the effects that this cut of funding of the US has had, is that we have been all become much more aware of the fragility of the system that is the UNRWA. Yeah, I mean the fragility of the sustainability, the fragility of the funding and the continuing doing the job that they are doing. So I would like to ask you both about what do you think that can be alternatives for the current system? You're muted.
Unmute, Sami.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for Nuria for the question. I think a permanent solution for the refugees is impossible at this time without permanent solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and also for the Palestinian people. It is important to have such an aid policy which is less dependent on the fund of the United States, and different political actors with different policies and interests toward the Palestinian Authority. It is important also to take into account the reduced budget of the UNRWA and try to prioritize the budget accordingly. So the future policy should take into account the fact that refugee dislocation may not temporary and strive to achieve a state where fewer people are dependent on the international humanitarian aid. Maybe such a solution should not be at the expense of the identity or collective right of the refugees. UNRWA, as an UNRWA, is active in 5 different regions under, different conditions. Policies and priorities vary between regions. For example, the most, important one in Lebanon. The most important factor that affect this policy is the civilian status of refugees in the region and the socio-economic and humanitarian conditions. I think the essence of the policy change that may suggested, and it is important to emphasize wherever possible, responsibility to aid and public services to refugees should be passed. I don't know, this is kind of discussion, passed from UNRWA to the local government, provided that this government is stable, internationally recognized, and the national collective rights of both Palestinians, civilian and of the hosting country. This policy change may make it more politically feasible to retain sufficient funding or some sort of compensation of the local government. But the question will be, why can such government succeed in remaining funding where UNRWA have failed? Okay, the change in American policy regarding UNRWA is part of an overall world view. And this is held by an important political coalition in the United States. That does not see UNRWA as a legitimate partners. This would view, however, does not necessarily extend to Arabic government like Egypt, who are allied with the United States. Egypt and Jordan, on the other, on the short and medium term, the relative legitimacy of some local Arab governments in the eyes of the current American administration will allow the continuation of the aid without direct UNRWA involvement. The effect or the effort of the UNRWA would instead be focused on region where no such solution is possible. I mean, the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. I don't know if any of our other speakers, Dr. Huber, Dr. Freiheit, has something to add to this specific question. Dr. Hubert?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think it another issue with UNRWA is that UNRWA is directly funded by states. And another solution can also be that UNRWA, like other UN agencies, should be funded by the UN. That would give UNRWA much more independence because, for example, now that Germany has become the main donor of UNRWA, there is now lobbying in Germany on the school book issue immediately, yeah? And so this makes UNRWA always subject to the will of these single donors, which is not what UNRWA should be. UNRWA is a UN agency and it should be funded by the UN. So I think that is also another point. And the other point, which I think came across very clearly with the refugee crisis in Syria, and particularly the Palestinian refugees in Syria, where there was incidences of refoulement of refugees who went to Jordan and were deported back into Syria. I think that there needs to be an enhanced protection function of UNRWA. In case the UNHCR does not take over the protection function, as in the case of Jordan, then UNRWA needs to have a protection function that it can lobby on behalf of the Palestinian refugees with the Jordanian government, for example. Yeah, so I think these are two issues which need to be solved in that respect also at the UN level.
If I may add, to my colleagues, and I agree with them totally, but just very briefly, I think is to leave the current funding the structure the way it is, that's subject to abuse and exploitation by the member states, not by the UN as an agency, as Daniela mentioned. I think it's a crime of what's happening, the funding mechanism that we have in place, because it all meant is that a tool to pressure and to elicit compromises and concessions and on the refugees side to exploit them further. The other thing is about the policies of the regional policies. When during the peak of the Syrian war in 2013 and 2014, I visited those refugees camps in Beirut, in Lebanon, and I spoke with the double refugees, the Palestinian refugees who were leaving a Yarmouk refugee camp from Syria and becoming a refugee a second and a third time, some of them, right? Because also from the Yarmouk, there were some of them who came from Iraq, right? After 2003, when Saddam Hussein regime collapsed there, they left, became a double refugee in the Yarmouk camp, and then with the Syrian civil war, became a refugee for the third time in Beirut, in Lebanon. And those refugees, Palestinian refugees, were given 1 month, right, during their time stay in Lebanon. And if they wanted to renew their residency papers, right, they were treated as tourists, like by the Lebanese, the official position of the Lebanese government during the peak time of the Syrian revolution. It was treating Palestinian refugees as tourists, right? Not even like the Syrian refugees, meaning tourists that when they overstay their time, is that they became subject to fines and illegal status and subject to prison and subject all these type of things. This must stop, right? In order to, this is not, again, there is total respect and understanding to the internal Lebanese political system of the balance between the sects and all, the Lebanese system. No one is touching this. No one is talking about this. And delivering or allowing a dignified life for the refugees without, again, interfering with any political solution has nothing to do with the sectarian balance, right, among different Lebanese sects that historically has been used as, again, an excuse or a reason to exploit and discriminate against the Palestinian refugees. And if you allow me, the third, one last point is on the Palestinian leadership, because they are equally responsible about this, because they have been also managing or dealing with the refugees for the past half century or more. Right, they became involved. What did they do in order to provide this sustainability and to allow for some dignified life? There's nothing, right? And also allowing for the exploitation to continue. And this also must be mentioned, and also they bear certain responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have another question also regarding the fact that, as Dr. Huber was explaining, and I mean at the beginning also Dr. Miyari was listing all the services that actually the UNRWA is providing to the refugees, that goes from health, education, microfinance, employment, infrastructure. So this is actually really like a whole package. Based on the needs of the refugees. So when the UNRWA went short on funding, of course, there was a void, yeah? So the US left a void there, which was mainly financial. As Dr. Huber said, this void could be covered more or less by the EU and by other countries. But my question is also regarding this, the danger that there is a void in terms that there is an opportunity for other parties, other countries, other groups that, as also happened in other countries, could take the chance to get more introduced in the Palestinian society among those people that are in need, and that can try also to fill the void of the services that are provided, of the needs that they have. And I don't know how you see this point, and if this is something that it has really happened, or if this is something that, in your opinion, could be in sort of way, overcome. Would be a question maybe for Dr. Freihat, maybe.
What is the question again? I'm not sure I understand.
My question is the void of services. I mean, the UNRWA has been providing services further on to the refugees, but in another kind of level. Then we have again not only the reduction of the funding of the US, but we have also the whole situation of the COVID last year, yeah, which was actually made things still more difficult. So the void left by the UNRWA in terms of being able to provide some services, because the number of needs in Palestine all across the country was much bigger. Do you think that this is also a danger in terms of what, for instance, Dr. Miyari was saying in terms of young people going more into criminality, maybe more radical groups being able to enter the country, being able to provide this kind of services? I'm thinking, for instance, in what happened in Egypt for many, many years. Of course, we are talking here about a shorter scope of time, yeah? But I don't know if there is also this danger in a way.
Absolutely. I thank you for this question. And here, let me link this to a point that I mentioned, which is, and again, adding or building on what Sami earlier mentioned about the possible link to whether it's to immigration or terrorism or other security implications, and the link to the regional context. Because this is all happening in a very troubled regional context that we're seeing happening. And here, Maria, I would like to mention the story of the Palestinian refugee boy from Lebanon who went to Harvard, who was admitted to Harvard University, and after he was admitted to Harvard University and got a scholarship from Harvard University, the Trump administration retained him from the airport, right? Of the policies that Donald Trump, that I'm sure some of you are familiar with the story. And then under international pressure on the US administration, allowed him to enter and to pass and to go to Harvard. And here, Nuria, I would like to emphasize what UNRWA has been doing, right, is delivering education to those kids, right, that preparing Palestinian refugees to be admitted to Harvard, not to join ISIS, right, or Al-Qaeda or other groups. This is the importance, or one important benefit and one important outcome, that having an effective and an important system like the UNRWA education to those kids, that to prepare them to compete in the most competitive universities in the world, in Harvard, and not to be subject to recruitment by different militias and civil wars and terrorism and all sorts of things. So yes, to answer your question, this void, right, will ultimately be filled by someone, right? Whether it's in Palestine or in the refugees camps in Lebanon or in Syria or the larger region. If no one is talking to those kids, others will. If we don't reach out to them, others will. If we don't send the right message to them, all other types of messages will be sent by others. So for this reason, that this must be realized by everyone and continue again to send Palestinian refugees to Harvard and Yale and Oxford, right? Not to other groups. And also, I'm sure there are many stories of one of the youngest Palestinian physician, right? Also from Lebanon, from the schools of UNRWA in Lebanon, that also joined a medical school in the United States and became one of the youngest physicians in the world. Also, that received the education and the right education. So this is something, the model that we had in place. And despite all types of troubles that happened over the past 10 years, right, in this region, right, when we look at the numbers, and I reviewed the numbers of those, for example, joined ISIS, right, from what countries they came from, you will immediately see, right, again, despite the refugee status and all that, one of the lowest countries in the world that joined ISIS came from Palestine, right? Because there is an education system, whether it's under occupation, the Palestinians for building and maintaining a strong education system, or outside, where UNRWA had a key role in maintaining this, and were not affected by this deterioration of the security. Then yes, again, Nuria, to answer your question, the void will ultimately be filled by someone. Let it be education and let it be UNRWA. Thank you.
Nuria, can I add something here?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you very much for your question. And I agree with Professor Ibrahim about what he mentioned, and this is very important. But if we take all the Palestinian the whole Palestinian political map, and also the whole, political map in the Arab countries and the changes, made recently in the Arab countries, we will see that more interventions of the Arab countries in Palestine. And these countries support the Dahlan, for example, frankly speaking, and also support the Palestinian Authority, and others support the Palestinian Authority. Going to the internal political problem inside the Palestinian Authority now, and the conflict between Dahlan and the Palestinian authorities, Dahlan, in the last 10 years, he got and still get many financial support from Arab countries, and support mainly the refugees camps. And this is now I can see the full picture, as of the political Palestinian map, as the refugees camps support, for example, the Dahlan and maybe Hamas and other radical political factions, and less for the Palestinian Authority controlled by Mahmoud Abbas. And so these kind of changes among the refugees camp, will affect in the future, the political aid. It kind, of another change will be made and affect the financial support for the refugees, and at the end, this will be with more political violence in the region.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We have two questions. One question is to Dr. Huber. How can young scientists influence decisions made by states that are affecting the life of refugees and that are affecting the human rights of these refugees?
Yes, thank you very much. So, I ask myself this question all the time as a think tanker. How can I actually influence decision making, which is obviously which is very difficult. I think one thing is to actually monitor what the states are doing. So, for example, no journalist monitors how Italy votes in the UN Human Rights Council. Yeah. So, but I monitor this all the time, and I get in touch with policymakers saying, well, you voted in this way, how does that reflect Italian foreign policy? So they know anyways, there is someone who actually looks at what they're doing. I think another issue is the issue of setting narratives from policymakers. So, you know, often they are so much into the daily business that they really lose the big picture of things. So one of the issues, which also Ibrahim said in a way before, yeah, if you look at the last, let's say 40 years of when the US took over this brokering role in the Middle East, what happened was that before there was, or there is in UN General Assembly resolutions, there is, it's very clear, there is inalienable rights, right? The right to self-determination, the right of return, as like the two key rights, I would say. They're anchored in General Assembly resolutions. And what the US did in these 40 years is to make them subject to negotiation, which became so normalized in the mind of policymakers. So I think another thing that young scientists can do is to show politicians that this is, you know, there is another narrative here. There is also the rights narrative, that the international law, there are rights, right? So you cannot just make them subject to negotiations. So this is, I think, a second function which scientists absolutely have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Huber. Another question we have for Dr. Ibrahim Fraihat. How do you see the role of the Palestinian factions and leadership within this whole refugee landscape?
Is there really a role for them? Because I'm not seeing that.
Yeah,
I mean,
there is.
But yes, I mean, that's unfortunately, Nuria, there is, that we never had a situation with regards to the Palestinian cause as weak as it is these days, right? For the first time, probably since Balfour Declaration, that the Palestinian leadership does not have a vision of how we're going to move forward in terms of the larger national cause. There was always a vision in place. Even in 1947 with 181, there was a vision. With 1993, with the Oslo Agreement, there was a vision, which is the two-state solution, building or establishing a Palestinian state on the 1967 lands occupied by Israel. But even this, if you ask any of the analysts here, if you ask Daniela's think tank and all the experts there, right, they will tell you this two-state solution doesn't exist on the ground. It's not realistic anymore. It doesn't exist. So what is the vision that the Palestinian leadership has for the larger national cause? Because again, as I said in my presentation, the refugees and UNRWA is part of this larger vision. Whatever happened there, it reflects itself on the issue of the refugees. So for the first time, we know there is no two-state solution. Anyone goes to the West Bank, they will see the settlements and will realize that there is no such thing, a two-state solution, because no viable Palestinian state can be established. But then we're not embracing the one-state solution, right? Or the no-state solution, or whatever. There is no vision. There is a confusion over the Palestinian leadership of adopting a real clear vision about what we want on the for the national cause. And this is the most dangerous for refugees and for UNRWA, because again, we don't know what is the larger vision that the Palestinian leadership holds. But to add to this, it's not only about, Nuria, the failure of the Palestinian leadership. It's about what I call it the failure of the elite, the failure of the different political factions. So they're not even in a better position, right, than the Palestinian leadership, because the divisions within the Palestinian different political factions is not only the leadership is responsible about it. It's about the political parties that were unable to offer an alternative to this. And even worse than this, instead of ending the Fatah-Hamas divisions on the Palestinian side, we are seeing 3 divisions within Fatah only in this coming elections. So three campaigns and three Fatahs that are running for this election. So this is not just the Palestinian leadership, it's about the political faction itself. So again, sadly, it's about this. There is an utter failure on the Palestinian formal, right, and non-formal leadership, right, on that level, which is again leaving the cause of the refugees subject to more exploitations by all these terms of emergency fund and relief fund. And there is a reform. The US position was talking about reform. And Nuria, what you can put under reform. Basically, it's like such a very broad term of that UNRWA needs to reform. You can put all type of things. You can transform the agency entirely, like totally away from what it should be really doing. So that is, unfortunately, yes, that the absence of a real effective leading Palestinian political position by the official leadership or the parties has exacerbated this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, just a very small note for the upcoming elections. There are 36 different parties registered.
Yes,
which is for this country and this kind of population, this is amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's like really, yeah. So fragmentation is.
There are only 2, right? So it's.
yeah, there are some parties, but but 36 is really a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if there are further questions from our guests. If not, I would just close here because we are actually just reaching the limit of time that we have set for the discussion.